No, Mom. You put the emotion clause on the front of the statement so they know how it's supposed to be interpreted. Alex sat in the darkened bridge, illuminated by dozens of holographic displays. His mother's image was front and center, bleary-eyed from the early morning call. That's fine. His mother may have ignored what he just told her. She may just have been half asleep. Be sure to let the shipmaster know she's doing a great job. He nodded at his mother on the screen, eyes darting over to check the countdown timer and a wall of instruments. She knows. We're about to drop back in. I need to go. That was a white lie. The wave ride was already in the deceleration phase, but would take at least 5 minutes. The anomalous reading on the Sheridan Reyes meter demanded his full attention for now, though, and he did not ever want to end a conversation with "these readings are strange." He packaged the data from the sensors and sent them along to the shipmaster through his amp. "Okay, Alex, you take care. I love you." She smiled the same smile as always, both a little proud and sad that her son had managed to become a scout ship pilot. This trip out was 2 years, and live communication was limited to FTL calls during a wave ride, if there was time. There usually wasn't. "Love you too, Mom." He smiled and waved, then cut the line. Almost as soon as his mother vanished from the screen, Shipmaster Challen popped up in her place. Their heads appeared about the same size, despite the shipmaster being shorter and proportionally smaller. Some people said Slao looked like dogs. Alex could see the similarity. The flattish head, dense blue-black fur, and the nose at the end of a short muzzle spoke very highly of it. Her ears were folded down against her head, as were the pair of antennae that allegedly gave them a sort of contact telepathy. Not that any of them were inclined to contact a human. "Pilot Sorensen, these readings are troubling. They were not present on the initial scan from the probe." Her mouth moved out of time with her words as his amp translated everything other than his name. It was easiest to let the respective computer interfaces translate. It must have made the negotiations to get this mission set up far less onerous. "Shipmaster Challen. They are indeed." He tarted up his speech patterns to make the translation smoother. The origin scan was decades ago. While the star was projected to be stable, there are many ways that could have changed. It could also be FTL drives. Possible, but unlikely. The severity of the spike would indicate 6, perhaps 8 capital-class ships with hot drives. The entire point of a scout ship was to deep scan uninhabited systems, and they were well away from any known controlled territory. It's almost as sharp as jumping into Saul. She regarded him for a long moment, then dipped her head in assent. That was the second time she'd done that in the 8 months he'd been working with her. A banner day. "I suggest as wide a course correction as is possible right now. In addition to this, I will pre-charge the sublight engines to boost an emergency wave ride." As she said it, he dipped back into the navigation system, onboard AI linking deeply with his brain, and began to alter course. Better than an emergency shutdown, and the week of inspections bringing the drives back on would require. They were cutting it close. It wouldn't be much of a change, but it would put them further away from the anomaly. A wise plan. Course has been corrected. Entering real space in 55 seconds. "Live well, Pilot Sorensen." She shut the connection down. The ship would almost be dead in space if she was using the sublight engines as capacitors for the wave drives, with nothing but a handful of docking thrusters to shove the ship around with. But they would be able to jump back out in just over 90 seconds. The amp filled Alex's brain with the surrounding space as they slowed to sublight speeds. It was far, far worse than he expected. "Shipmaster, we need the wave riders back up immediately." "It is seen." Even through the translator, her words were terse. Spread out in the darkness of the local system were 2 massive clusters of ships, a pair of EOM fleets. The backbone of each fleet was a kilometers-long home ship surrounded by a swarm of spacecraft of every conceivable size. It wasn't unheard of them to make contact with each other, do a bit of trading. This wasn't EOM territory. They weren't supposed to be this far out spinward. The hostile action warning started going off in the back of Alex's head as the computer superimposed a burning red dot on the nearest fleet. Another and another popped up, then a few dozen more as more EOM ships became aware of them and started to heat up their guns. To say the Awam were violently xenophobic would be an understatement. The first dot flickered and became a line with a little cluster of data attached to it. Railgun, approximately 50 centimeter, radiological, 99% chance of impact in 11 seconds. Alex gave the ship a nudge with the docking thrusters, and the line turned yellow, then blue. The chance of impact dropped to 0 as a half dozen more lines speared outward from the fleet. He opened the comm to the shipmaster. In the length of time, It took that link to open. That number doubled. We need to go now. 30 seconds. She was aware of this fact. He glanced across the rapidly widening array of ordnance being thrown at them and shook his head, missile lock warnings blaring in his wetware. Docking thrusters wouldn't dodge those. I need my engines back. We start eating missiles in 10 seconds. I need them now. Can you? No, I can't. He cut her off again and pressed his credentials into the computer, overriding her control of the sublight engines. A distinct feeling of power flooded his body as he snapped out a roll and started to run, dumping flares and jamming pods behind them. Just tell me when the wave riders are up. When can we jump? Normally, Alex would have set up a countdown timer himself without having to ask the shipmaster. But that requires a purposeful, focused thought. He didn't dare take his attention away from navigating a still-growing cloud of eom projectiles. 6 minutes. The words were, at best, venomous. They made it clear that usurping Shipmaster Chalin's authority over the engines and power plant had not done anything to improve her view of him. Super. Alex rolled the ship out of the way of a particularly dense cluster of projectiles. Truth be told, they probably could have safely taken the damage from a missile, maybe 2. It would have peeled off the shields, no doubt about that. Anything else after that would have been a different story entirely. He cleared his mind of second-guessing for the time being. They just had to hang on for 6 minutes. Easy. Sensors shrieked in his mind, and Alex flinched away from the noise, jerking the Kslavo out of the path of a superluminal bolt. With the shipboard AI hooked so tightly into his brain, he felt it as it passed. The sensation of something searing hot skating over his skin, the bones beneath flexing. The feelings were all simulated to make it crystal clear this was not something he wanted to let make contact. If the Yuam were going to use near-instant strike weapons usually reserved for capital ships, running wasn't going to work for 6 minutes. The scout ship was mostly engine and armor, giving it an unusual level of agility and sublight and extreme durability for a ship its size, but it wouldn't be able to shrug off a single hit like that. A conventional tack would not work, so he cobbled together what he knew about the Eom and made something unconventional. Alex brought the long-range scanners online and killed the main thrusters just long enough to flip the Kslavo over and begin a run at the twin Eom fleets. The shipmaster's channel opened a heartbeat later. Even with the faint digitization, the translator conveyed the alien's alarm and anger. Why have we reversed direction? I'm buying time. He was distant, eyes searching for a clear path and any kind of missile. The long-range sensors moved with his gaze, the wide-band impulse blinding whatever it touched. It only took a few moments for the AI to understand what he was doing and take over. I've got this. You have what? In another situation, it would have been nice to not hear exasperation when he was imprecise about something, even if she was still really pissed. I have a plan. I'm going to the only defensible location around here. The extra information cooled her temper, her words now just terse. You are going there through the Yom? Alex flinched again as a railgun projectile skipped off their shields, a hot knife dragged across his chest. I am going to the Yom. The translator passed along an angry burst of Tsla, whatever she had said not present in the dictionary. We will not go to our deaths. Change direction immediately, pilot. They won't risk firing on each other. She made a sort of grunt sound that Alex understood as the Tslao version of huh. Eom view other life as dangerous, but their own is sacred. They won't take the chance. He hoped they wouldn't anyway. No one had ever had the opportunity to test that theory until now. By your sight I yield, pilot. That wasn't something he had heard her say before. There might have been a hint of approval in there too, somewhere. Even if it was new to him, Alex was still pretty sure he got her meaning. Thanks. The incoming fire had died down as they approached. The Eom stopped firing missiles entirely, and larger class projectiles gave way to smaller guns that the shields could shrug off. 3 minutes left as they slipped into the space between the two fleets. Everything went silent. Alex opened the comm to the shipmaster again, a smile creeping onto his face. Worked like a charm. Hold your pride until we are underway again. That was prudent advice. There was still an enormous amount of ordnance pointed at them. Very well. He kept it in check as he jinked the ship around the safe zone. 2 minutes. 1 minute. The Sheridan Reyes sensor went off the charts, and Alex cussed to himself as one of the fleets jumped out. He made a run for the remaining fleet as thousands of guns leveled at them went hot at once. His vision turned into a mass of red-firing solution threads, with the Kslavo sitting at their apex. Alex was a good pilot, probably one of the best in his estimation, but some odds were too long. Alex had been pretty sure that that life flashing before your eyes thing when you died was just bunk. But there it went. A stuttering slideshow of his life, snippets from childhood to just a few days ago, flickered through his mind. All the things that had made him who he was. It was interspersed with the weirdest feelings, something like comfort and gratification, but decidedly foreign. At least it felt positive. Then all of it gave way to darkness. There were many things about darkness that Alex didn't like. The big one was that the inability to tell where he was in relation to things set off intense claustrophobia, and that led to the inescapable feeling that he was about to be crushed by something. He had worked on this as he had grown, reducing an irrational fear to a mere dislike. He now awoke to find himself in absolute darkness, and a quick test of his body revealed that he was trapped, entirely immobile. The panic Alex had banished so long ago began to creep back in around the edges. He steeled himself against it and started to work out how he had gotten here. The second Eom fleet had jumped out and he couldn't get to cover in time. The ship had shrugged off a few projectiles, but the volume of fire had been overwhelming and Alex recalled the crash cage coming up around him in the bridge, the fiery sting as an array of injectors dumped chemicals and triage nanites into his body. That's about where it stopped. So, presumably, he was still ensconced safely in crash foam. He tried to wriggle his fingers and toes again, to no avail. There should have been just a little bit of movement, given him the barest of indication that his limbs were still there. There wasn't. He was becoming aware of the fact he couldn't feel his body at all. Still, he kept his fear in check. His amp was off, so he'd just restarted, and it had linked to the ship's communication system. Alex focused and gave it a mental nudge as he had done so many times before, then waited for the startup sound. The familiar guitar strum never came. Now, panicking seemed like the thing to do. Alex gritted his teeth and tried to keep his breathing steady and found that it already was. His heart beat slowly in his ears. The only thing he could hear was the even pace of his own body. It was so disconcerting it overtook the panic he felt about being trapped. This wasn't right at all. Alex tried to stop breathing to listen better, but his lungs kept on going. He strained and could hear a quiet hum that didn't sound like anything he knew, and maybe someone else breathing. Hello? He timed it with an exhale, the word unexpectedly timid and a little bit slurred. The hum continued for a few seconds, then stopped. A click-thunk followed, and it started up again. Alex knew that sound, a Medical dispenser cartridge being changed. No one answered. He waited for the exhale and tried again in Scylla this time. Kava? Lanshalin? Nothing happened for a moment. Then the shipmaster heaved a sigh Alex had heard dozens of times before, as though she was being put upon by a moron. Yes. Where, he caught himself and asked a much more pressing question. You speak English? I do. Oh. The effect was deeply disturbing. It definitely sounded like the shipmaster, and she was definitely speaking English. No one had told him she could do that. For a moment, he wanted to continue to grill her on this topic, but refocused himself to more important issues. What happened? You suffered severe burns and other physical trauma, Pilot Sorensen? Most of your motor functions are obscured by the SAA. She paused, apparently to correct herself. Mediboard. That sounds bad. The bits of information helped resolve the situation. If he was on the Mediboard, it would try to keep him conscious so he could still be of use. Am I blind? No. She was silent for a moment and Alex could hear her breathing. Your eyes, optic nerve, and visual cortex are mostly unharmed. But I can't see. He was sure he could feel himself blinking, though. I have shut off the light in this room. Lights, 10%. Naturally, she had shut off the voice control as well. He hadn't read anything indicating Slough could see in total darkness. Their visual range shouldn't be too different from that of a human. How in the hell was she doing anything? Did her encounter suit have sensors refined enough to act as night vision? Could you turn them on? No. Her tone indicated that was the last thing she was going to say about it. Consciously, Alex was starting to panic again. His body still did not care, even though he felt the old fears start to claw at the edge of his psyche. Really, it won't hurt anything. I am indecent. He actually laughed out loud at that. Indecent? His mind shifted from fear to anger. She hadn't even turned her encounter suits shielding off around him for the first month out in the black. What the hell? Had she forgotten her gloves? Come on, just a little bit. Alex may have sounded more desperate than he wanted to. No. A bit of venom this time. The shipmaster punctuated that with another fresh medical canister. The fear rushed back in, stronger than before. She was just going to let him lay here, pinned to the Mediboard like a dead bug while he went insane. He felt his heart rate rise for a moment before the Mediboard brought it back into line. He had reached his last option. Honesty. The words spilled out with unintentional force, strained despite most of his body's refusal to play along. I'm afraid of the dark. She didn't say anything for an eternity, then sighed again. Very well. The lights came up just a little. He found that one of his eyes wasn't working right. Its unwavering gaze was fixed on the ceiling. The other one worked just fine, though, and after a moment of nausea, he located the shipmaster at the foot of the Mediboard, gel gun in hand, a dozen empties floating in the air behind her. The locked eyes for a moment, and he understood what she had meant by indecent. Aside from the black metal lump of her personal AI clinging to her shoulders, she appeared to be naked. Tislao definitely fit the bill for mammals, all right. The same black fur on her head carried down the rest of her, save for unexpected light blue stripes starting on her neck and running down her back. There was blood, too, a shocking amount of it smeared over pretty much all of her that Alex could see. Even in the dim light, it carried the bright red gleam of human blood. And worse beyond that were blackened chunks of something stuck to her dark fur. She had said he had severe burns. That was his blood, bits of his body that had flaked off. Alex's good eye swiveled away, and he immediately began to stammer out an apology. Stop, that is an embarrassment to us both. Okay. His eye stayed focused on the far wall, vision doubled weirdly and threatening to make him sick again. This certainly was more awkward than he had expected it to be. Maybe a little small talk would help ease the situation. What happened to your encounter suit? It caught fire. Given how pissed she sounded, that had not been the right thing to ask about. How is the damage to the ship? Severe. The third projectile past the armor damaged the Wave Rider drives, but the damage is asymmetrical. One may be rebuilt from the two. That was better. She sounded far less aggravated already. Shipmaster Challen, I must apologize for my behavior. It was uncalled for. It is unnecessary. I was thinking of no one but myself. She did not respond for a few long seconds, lips pursed as she stared down at the Medigel gun. Call me Carbon, Alex. For the first time in quite a while, he was stunned silent. More than anything else that had transpired for just about as long as he could remember, this was a surprise he didn't know what to do with. That's an unusual name. My parents enjoyed the way it sounded. My father traded mineral commodities. My mother was a teacher. I do not speak your language by accident. She set the dispenser down into its holder, clicking it into place. Her jaw tensed for a moment, and she gave him a sidelong glance. If we are to survive, formalities will not help us. With that, she turned and pushed off from the Mediboard, gliding silently out of the sickbay. He couldn't do anything but lay there and reflect on what had just transpired. According to the primer that the civilian pilot program had given him about Slough culture, they did not address one another by first name alone, particularly not in a situation where they were crew members of equal rank. As far as he knew, it was usually reserved for family or trusted friends, someone they would share a neural link with. It wasn't his life flashing before his eyes. It had been flashing before hers. With the shipmaster, Carbon now, Alex supposed, gone, and nothing to do but sit in a dim room while pinned to the Mediboard, listening to his body breathe without his input. Alex didn't find sleep quickly. Presumably, whatever the crash protocols injected him with was still in his system, keeping him functional, which if there were pirates or an actual crash, would be useful. Right now, it was keeping him staring at the ceiling for hours, only able to turn his eye far enough to see the clock on the wall. When he did finally find sleep, the dream came almost immediately. He pushed himself up out of the cockpit of the simulator, blinking in the bright lights of the sim bay as the shroud retracted from his pod. He had a stupid sort of grin on his face, an enthusiasm that permeated the whole of his being. If that's what the next generation of Wave Rider drives is going, I can't wait to get my hands on the real thing. There was a little hiccup in his dream here. Something interjected a curious sense of superiority, maybe smug satisfaction. There was a word for it. He just couldn't remember. It wasn't his word. I think everybody is interested in that right now, Pilot Sorensen. Ed Brzezinski reached down and helped him up out of the sim pod. A massive, bald man who was his trainer in the scoutship program, an old pro who'd been out in the black a dozen times. Ed had never called him Pilot Sorensen. Are they going to have these ready for my ship? He was eager to know when he would finally get his assignment. He had spent more than a year getting ready for this assignment, even spent 3 months at a Navy boot camp for zero-G training. They should have put him on one by now. You know, I've been getting kind of restless seeing other scouts deploy while I get held back again and again. But if the trade-off was the new engines, I guess the wait will have been worth it. As a matter of fact, they will. Your charge will be ready in just about another month. Ed looked. Alex wasn't sure. Sad, tense, hopeful, and worried, all at the same time, boiling just below the surface. He had never seen Ed as anything less than confident, so quick with a smile. He could have been an actor playing a role the entire time Alex had known him. There was more happening than he was letting on. Another hitch. A flicker of an emotion that wasn't his, this time pleased at his insight into someone else's emotions. That's great! Is it new? Will I get to name it? First pilot always got to name a new ship. He felt like a kid in a candy store at the prospect, his mind running down the top 3 names he had prepped. Ed cleared his throat, bringing Alex out of his reverie. No, it's already named. I guess that makes sense. It wasn't unusual for ships with the first run of new technology to already be named, particularly when it came to engines. Everybody involved wanted their fingerprints on it. What's it called? Kslavo, bridge builder. I don't recognize that language. It's Tslao. Ed paused, hesitated, glancing around before continuing with an unusual amount of caution in his voice. Your engineer is going to be one of theirs. Alan, a shipmaster. Tslao? They're putting me on a ship with a fucking dog! His voice practically cracked, starting to make a scene in the quiet hum of the sim bay. He didn't have any particular problems with the Tslao. Hadn't even met any. That didn't mean he wanted to have to deal with one of them, let alone get stuck with one in a scout ship. Raw, utterly visceral disappointment. Watch your mouth. Ed's face twisted with anger for a moment before he caught himself and his voice dropped an octave, eyes gleaming with a hard edge as he leaned into Alex. Come to my office. You need to see something. Alex hadn't thought he'd said anything particularly bad. Nothing he didn't hear a dozen times a week out of other pilots. But given the way that people moved out of Ed's way, he had fucked up pretty impressively. Goodbye, future opportunities. Ed slapped the control panel, closing the door behind Alex and dropped himself into his desk chair without saying a word. Alex sat silently across from him with the hope that he might be able to salvage his career as a pilot, still just barely kindled in his heart. Ed just stared at his monitor, hands resting on the inputs and clicking through quite a bit while he looked for something. When he found it, he swiveled the screen around to Alex. Just a video, time-lapse, of a blue and green planet spinning slowly. The original timestamps were in a flowing script he assumed to be Tsla, modern English numerals tacked on after the original recording just below it. It ticked forward 3 minutes every second. Must have been taken from a geosynchronous satellite as the landmass below never changed. He missed it at first. A black speck a few hundred kilometers from the western coast. It expanded, a ragged spot and then a gray-black smudge spreading across the atmosphere. The playback sped up, each tick an hour forward. The continent dipped into night and then came back around to day. The streak had widened by about double. Alex's blood ran cold as he watched it envelop most of the planet, finally understanding what he was looking at. Was that a volcano? There was a hitch again, longer this time. Sorrow so bad it hurt. Sort of. A caldera. Ejected more than 9,000 cubic kilometers of debris into the air. A 10 on the volcanic explosivity index, which is rare on inhabited planets. Ed had calmed significantly, his normally cool demeanor sliding back into place. The old pilot continued. That was about 2 years ago. They came to us for help about a year later. Asked for discretion, so it's not a public knowledge thing despite how much material we've sent their way. Scientists figure it'll take about a decade for the ash to come down and who knows how long to fix up the biosphere. In the meantime, most cities have functioning shielding, but they're still trying to offload the remaining 1.5 billion refugees on planet. Alex nodded, unable to look away as the video looped and the volcanic smear spun on the screen again, shrouding more and more of the Tslao home planet in darkness. He understood the limitations of atmospheric craft and ash was one of the worst things to fly through. It would stick to everything, and it was abrasive. There were ways around that, but even small craft would require dozens of modifications to survive multiple trips without spending a long time in maintenance. Maybe some atmosphere-capable warships with fully sealed systems, but good luck landing those in a city. It's dead, isn't it? Basically, we've been helping with the offload, giving shelter where possible without making a scene. He gave Alex a sharp look. Getting their shipbuilding capability back up has been a nightmare, I'm told. A lot of their manufacturing was done on the ground on their homeworld, and a lot of their experienced engineers are dead. Even if they weren't building new ships, they would still have to maintain the old ones. Alex didn't know the numbers of what the Tlao fleet looked like, but if the main source of parts was gone, it would be dwindling by the day. Guessing there's not a lot of interoperable technology. A lot of things are similar enough, Ed shrugged. They love quick weld, and we've got the Lamar refit dock in orbit, so they can replicate specific parts on site at least. Good. That's something at least. The last few minutes had changed his perspective significantly. How are they doing? Just a tiny glimmer of approval. A choice that hadn't been wrong. Everything they've got is crammed full of refugees. They're constantly short of food, medical supplies, and everything else. So about as shitty as you'd expect. Ed swiveled his monitor around again and leaned back in his chair. That is why we embarked upon this little project. The Xlavo uses a scout ship frame that was nearing completion with Tlao engines refit into it. Yeah, I get... Alex would have sat up bolt upright, startled from sleep by the door to the medical bay opening, but he was still fastened securely to the mediboard. His eye swiveled down to find Carbon returning, cleaned up and dressed in a plain black jumpsuit. She sort of looked at him, eyes dull and sick as she scanned the room, and then proceeded to the medical dispenser. What's up? Carbon didn't respond, save for her ears twitching. She switched the dispenser into Tesla and started dialing things in, each press on the screen slow and methodical. She shifted as she tapped out a few doses, and Alex recognized the handful of important Tesla symbols they had made him memorize on the screen. How much radiation did you take?